from wherever you are, and welcome to Let's Play Games. I'm John McFarland, Adult Services Librarian for Nashville Public Libraries, and I hope you'll join me in learning or rediscovering some of the more common and uncommon games out there. We're taking the time to go through chess and demystifying what is a complex game. Last time, we went into what are called king-side openers and to the value of pieces and making them more important. This time, we're going to go into queen-side openers and also some things you can do in the middle tactically to improve your chances of winning. Let's get stuck in. So, Phil had to step away a second. In the meantime, I've still got stuff to show you, especially one of the more popular moves out there recently. You may have heard of it, the Queen's Gambit. It is actually the name of a move and a specific move set. And I want to show it to you real quick so that way we can talk about why it's important. So Queen's Gambit is part of, we've talked about king side opening a fair amount. Let's talk about queen side openings because that's probably the second most popular initial move. And that's going to be this D4 that's right here. It does open up that king space, but it also frees up the queen to move straight ahead. It also frees up this diagonal. Typically, people will like to do a castling, like we've talked about, on the queen side when we do that. So the next move of this is D5. So let's see if they actually meet it. The next one's going to be interesting because this is where it branches off. We've got the Queen's Gambit accepted and Queen's Gambit declined. And that turns into other defensive styles for especially black, like the Slav defense, also the Berlin defense, which we won't cover as exhaustively. But so let's say that they're going to decide to take that piece. So this would be Queen's Gambit accepted. So they take that piece. But at the same time, it's kind of hanging there. We'll do this knight. So now we've protected that piece. So that way the queen can't attack it directly because now that one pawn is the only thing standing in between queens. So let's move this NF6 right here. That's also kind of trying to cover this center space here. And it's another defense we'll get to in a moment that starts off with that. So now we've got that. We'll have this protection of this pawn. So now there's two pieces protecting that pawn from the queen potentially attacking. Now we're gonna have E6. We're gonna move a little forward so that way it opens that bishop and protects the knight more firmly. Here's where it gets interesting. This bishop is gonna take that hanging space. And the reason that that's gonna be important is it allows movement here on this third row, and it potentially could impact the king one move later. So we've talked before about movements that expose that diagonal space there. This could potentially make use of that. Another thing would then be C5. And the reason we're doing that is we're really trying to open up space as black now. We're trying to make sure this entire space is pretty much covered so any sort of diagonal attempts will fail. And the last thing will be castling. Like I said, castling is a popular move. And because of that, you do have multiple instances of within 10 moves, everybody ends up castling. So this is an initial setup. In the series, you didn't really see it as often, but it was the first that character in the series learned. And I wanted to make sure you saw exactly why you started seeing the development of it. You've got good options if you're, especially white, you can go after some of these higher value pieces soon. So This is going to potentially cause some sacrifice of at least that bishop. If not, if they make a blunder, the queen. You can move into a position to check the king. So if you do that, a6 you've seen as a popular response to that, but they have to move the king first. So you're limiting the options that can be done. So that is the Queen Gambit. And these openings take you to an initial development. What happens there is up to you. Let's take a step back a moment and we will show you a little bit more of some openings on the queen side. So last we left off, the queen became a powerful piece and it was in the hands of the knightly crusaders. Well, how did it start reaching more people? As the game got brought back and adapted and became more ever popular in the courts of European royalty, we started to see a little bit of adaptation for people who weren't royalty. Nobility could take it on more, and progressively, the lower ranked persons of society were able to have versions of this game that were a little easier to produce. Now, the royalty would have pieces made out of solid gold and diamond and crystal. Most of the chess pieces were commonly made out of wood and other easy to craft surfaces. But we started seeing of the gentlemanly society in the 1800s, they started putting out treatises on chess, on how to play chess more effectively. And it was of the gentlemanly and proper parts of society where you started seeing these in the wealthier nobility, and progressively people kept learning to play it. So it became an ever popular pastime as more people could read, as more people could afford chess sets, and as more people could congregate to play together. I'm sure you can guess what comes next. Tournaments. So while we have a little more time, I want to show you another opening that is actually better for black than it is for white. And part of the reason why is a lot of the game has taken its turn into how white can set up a position. You're going to be playing as black around half of the time, so we might as well have something for that. So we'll do that queen side opening again. That d4 that could evolve into the queen's gambit. But let's say for the sake of conversation, we move this knight out here first. This is what's known as the king's, because it's on the king side, Indian defense. And the reason why it's called an Indian defense is because the person who popularized it in the mid-19th century was an Indian chess champion. So from here, this was one of their trademark moves. And instead of going for this and trying to defend this piece on d4, we're gonna actually try and push hard for the center. And then g6. If you watch that first game that we did, this was almost exactly what I did, barring I had to delay something by about a move or two. So we've got this nc3. So if you could have some colors here contrasting what space is being covered on the board, pretty much here, 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 and yeah. These 5 squares here are specifically covered by white. Black currently is covering pretty much this side, king side angle over here with a little bit into the center. So the next move after this nc3, we're gonna move the bishop out. And that frees up that castling opportunity here soon. We're gonna do e4. White's response is, well, if you're gonna give me all this space, I'm gonna take all of this space. The next move is d6. So so not only are we keeping that castling opportunity for when we're ready to use it, we're also opening up that diagonal. So we're gonna make this side the king's side, the focus of our attack. There is basically a flip to this opening called the Queen's Indian, lesser used, but it's the same principle. You're opening up space so that way you can start moving down this side, potentially putting this at risk, especially these pawns here. You're going to want to try and break these. So this is part of your plan for potentially doing the checkmate. So after we're going to develop this one again, because they're going to want a castle too. At this point, you go and pull off that castling move. At this point, your king is protected by a little triangle pawn structure, a bishop, a knight, and that E piece ready to move up at a moment's notice to protect that queen. So we're going to go with the B, E2. We'll move the bishop into the center to try and protect this little open space we've got here. E is going to move up to 5. So now this is where you start getting the conflict. You've created some open space. You've started your attacking move. It's going to require you to actually attack and make an aggressive move. So from here, we'll see the castle. And then we'll have this NC6. We're going to keep putting pressure on this diagonal here. Now, we're going to go to D5. Because from here, it's okay, I'm going to continue holding the center to see if I can split you in half, I can start moving out, or especially moving into this corner and blocking you in. The last traditional kind of move here is E7. So from here, you can see the beginnings of a match. You can see the responses to what Black has done, opening up the idea of potentially moving towards a particular type of checkmate. From here, you've got plans, you've got options as to what you can do. You've also got this area strongly protected by white, and Black is going to try and dig into this piece by piece by piece. So that is where I usually recommend taking the time to practice these openings and learning these openings, because as you do it more, you will find that you see what works best with it. You see, especially when you're trying to do an opening, if it's an opening you're familiar with, that you can say, okay, this opening is not going to work. I cannot win with this. It is, for example, if let's say the knights were over here and the bishop was covered open, now you've got this entire section covered. Pretty much that's white's plan from this point as well, where anything that comes in this core area here can be immediately captured, or at least be at risk of being captured. So it's a pretty evenly positioned game at the start. But this is what you're trying to do on both sides. Trying to have a strong position where when you get to the middle game and start capturing pieces, you have at least a basis of framework to go on. So I'm going to take another step back. I've got a little bit more history for you, and then we're going to go into my personal favorite opening system. More on that in a sec. So as I was saying before, tournaments. Tournaments started to be seen in its kind of proto form in 1834 and 1851 were the first two really documented events that we would classify as tournaments. And they would be groups of gentlemen coming together in order to play each other in certain types of styles, either round robin or a Swiss system, which would be a more effective pairing system. But we ran into a problem. People would wait people out. They would make moves and deliberate those moves for hours on end. There were no time controls, so they would wait their opponents out, especially if they were in a losing position. That had to be fixed. They started adding time controls, and as clocks became easier to produce, you saw our first version of time clocks, as Phil brought to us. They were simple mechanisms to stop and start the clock relatively, and they started coming to agreements of how long they could take or when they were going to take breaks. The best part was they would have what are called sealed moves. So the person would make their move, they would write it down, and it would be sealed, so that way the opponent wouldn't have multiple hours on a lunch break or an extended bathroom break to deliberate what the moves were. So it was a nice, effective anti-cheating measure. Welcome back. While Phil's away, I'm going to let you in on my favorite opening, especially because if it's white as your opening, you could technically do this entire full move structure without ever having to consider any of the other pieces on the board. It's one of the easiest to learn simply because it is entirely undependent on whatever black's moves are. So this is another queen side, our D4 here. If they respond back with D5, you're doing good to start off. And you've heard us talk about the bishops being a piece that you can get out quickly, or the queen, you can get it out quickly, but you are putting it at risk. But this is going to be a bold play. You're going to put this bishop out here. I'm going to try and declare this diagonal as my turf. Let's say here, kind of looks like the King's Indian opening. So if you know that someone's going for that, this is a decent counter to that. Next is going to be E3. Why would you do that? Because technically this bishop has really no real routes of escape aside from back. They're limited in their options, so you may have to deal with a capture fairly quickly, especially because one move away, you got that. But that's also time that can then be spent with a trade-off or some other option here. But if I'm black, I also don't particularly like that that piece is in the center occupying all that turf. So I'm gonna move this up to C5. I'm gonna put this piece at risk. The easiest way to counter this is just this. So in 4 moves, you've moved 3 pawns and a bishop, and you have created a structure by which they would have to lose at least 1, if not potentially 2 pawns just to take your 1. So you've got a good setup from there and a good way to get the game going for yourself. So let's see them develop the knight here. So this is a traditional 2 knights. They're wanting to take control of the center. And it opens up a little bit more options, especially for the queen side to move out and not be restricted. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna reinforce this center. All about this system, it's called the London system, based after where it was created. I'm trying to create a central defensive structure by which you have to come to me and I can respond to just about anything that you're doing. So now we'll get this E6, we'll reinforce that piece there. So they've still got some open space here to deal with. Now here's where that notation comes in. Both of these knights can occupy the F3 square, but we're gonna take the NG rather than the ND, NG, F3. So now we're getting closer to having a castling opportunity if we want to use it. Now we are going to have some conflict here. Now we've got this D6 here. Now you've got to consider what you can do because this is supported by 2 pieces right now. If you use this as your sole basis, it's not a great exchange because it means that you are having to move this, which opens up that queen over here to place pieces in check. So what you're gonna do is you're going to allow for the opportunity For that piece, yes, it might be captured, but it's also technically a move that's going to be an equivalent exchange. That bishop's going to immediately be taken. Black takes the opportunity traditionally to castle, so that way they're going to keep their pieces protected. All right, if you're going to hold the center, you still have to break through. Then you've got b d3. So we're moving a little forward. We're going to keep this knight protected a little more. We're going to still have the options here. So now if that piece gets captured, you've got 2 options, actually 3 options for capturing it. Not a bad move. Now we have b6. So notice they've got a structure over here too. They've got it well protected. The bishops are still kind of in play. Only one of them's really pointing out, but they can protect that interior. The queen's absolutely protecting this entire, the entire space here. So you've got a lot of options here. The last thing to get this all set up is this. Now at this point, you have a complete set of options, and I'm gonna go ahead and move this here because that's traditionally the motivational space here. So queen's got this area covered, knights have this area covered, bishops have this area covered. You can go ahead and potentially set up a sacrifice play there. So from here, this is why it's a good move set and a good move structure. So that way you begin this game with a decent framework, and when it transitions into the middle game, because eventually pieces are going to start moving forward. But this first 9 moves gives you a good basis. All of the pieces are protected. None of the pieces are hanging. Only one piece is really at real risk of being captured, and even then, it's an exchange. So this would be one that I'd recommend doing, taking piece by piece and setting it up. Also because in general, you can do it not in complete order. If you want, you could move the knight out here early. You could move, technically when we had this pawn waiting, we could wait as far as this piece moving forward, which was at move 3. Sometimes it happens at move 5 or move 6. So this is that initial set up, and one that I think will absolutely be of a benefit to anybody who's just starting out and trying to get some of these openings memorized. So take another step back, reset the board, because I've got a little bit more to show you. After these first tournaments and some of the changes on sealed moves and time controls started to really proliferate, you started to see people who could actually start making a nice living off of playing chess. You can look up some names. William Steinitz, Paul Morphy are 2 great examples. Paul Morphy was an American who lived in Louisiana. Steinitz, who's recognized as the first world champion, was from Austria and eventually emigrated to New York and became an American citizen. So we started seeing gentlemanly turn into where if you were good at chess, you could make the rounds. You also saw child prodigies, people who were as young as 9 starting to be able to beat up on these European champions and toured around Europe. You started to also see what is now known as the FIDE, which is the International Federation of Chess, and you got these tournaments to determine who the actual world champion was. And we've had a whole lot of people since then become world champions, typically European, or for the longest time, the Soviet Union and their Soviet School of Chess, which you can look up. It's a whole system unto itself. They had control of the World Chess Championship for a full 20 years until another American, Bobby Fischer, ended up taking out Boris Spassky. But more on the tournaments as it evolved in a bit. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for tuning in. Next time, we are going to go into more depth about the end of the game, closers and checkmate. Also, we'll be going through a couple of classic games, so that way you can follow along and replicate these moves yourself and learn even more about how to get better at this game. I'll see you next time.